So it turns out that Futurama's coming back again, but this time something feels different in the way the news has been received. And I don't just mean the fan confusion and outrage at the fact that it appears Futurama might be recasting Bender. No, I'm speaking in a broader sense. Should Futurama have been revived? It's not for me to say, but I would like to note how odd it is that this question is even being asked. And it is being asked. So in this video, I want to get to the bottom of this audience ambivalence, and maybe figure out what it tells us on a wider scale about television viewing culture in 2022. I'm making this video largely because of a YouTube community post I made a few days back, sharing the news of a confirmed Futurama revival. And to be clear, I made this post in the heat of the moment. I love Futurama, and news of more episodes instantly excited me. When I made this post, I hadn't heard that John DiMaggio might not be returning, and I hadn't sat down and actually considered the pros and cons of bringing this show back 10 years on. No, this post was pure hype, and many of the comments reflected this, visibly excited about the prospect of more adventures with the Planet Express crew. But there were also a surprising number of less excited comments, and I was expecting some reactions like this, but not this many. Comments like, "I'm not sure if Futurama needs another season. Wait, why? No, it ended perfectly. We do not need any more Futurama." And perhaps most interestingly, again, "I loved Futurama, but why can't we let things die?" Seeing this negativity towards the revival on my channel gave me pause for thought, not least because a good deal of this channel's viewers seem to be heavily in favour of reviving other long-dead shows, and also because, well, Futurama was great, and it stayed pretty solid even after being revived following previous cancellations. Even before Hulu commissioned these new episodes, Futurama was a show infamous for its many revivals, and while the quality did slightly dip during the Comedy Central seasons, it wasn't a decline remotely similar to, say, modern Simpsons, and many Futurama fans hold the season 7 finale to be one of the show's all-time best episodes. And if previous revivals were met with rapturous excitement, what has changed this time? Well, I want to start by suggesting something which might not be obvious to people my age or younger. Revivals like this are a relatively new phenomenon. We tend to take for granted nowadays that any project, any IP, any fictional world can be picked up again even years later, and can keep on telling new stories. And while sequels have always existed in some form or another, and franchises have dominated the box office for decades, before, say, the 21st century and the age of DVDs, a TV series having the sort of stop-start run Futurama has had over the past 20 years or so would have been pretty much unheard of. Maybe a reunion special, sure, but not multiple returns to full production under a different network years and years apart. I want to suggest that the normalization of things like this is part of a wider cultural shift, a shift which many have recognized in recent years. And that's the way that the world of modern TV and film is something of a perpetual middle. Let me explain. A piece in The Atlantic, called The Rise of Must-Read TV, notes that while conventional wisdom among literary critics holds that a plot derives its meaning from its ending, this theory falls apart when it comes to television. The classic shape of a TV show is a potentially endless overarching plot, or none at all, structured by episodes. Like day-to-day life, TV is all middle. For people who think about narratives as beginnings, middles, and ends, this is confusing and potentially frustrating. But the thing is, I think this phenomenon of television as endlessly ongoing middle has been intensified in recent years by the modern fascination with reboots, remakes, and revivals. Speaking on this trend, an article in the Cosmopolitan writes, "There's no pinpointing when it all started. You'll likely remember the first time a show or film you loved got remade, and probably you were overjoyed to see it welcome back into your eyeballs. But over the years, these rare returning favourites seem to have turned into unwelcome houseguests, showing up unannounced and refusing to leave. There have always been remakes, but increasingly there seems to be nothing else." But don't take Cosmopolitan's word for it. Don't even take my word for it. There's literally thousands of articles, think pieces, YouTube videos and the like addressing the recent ramp up in reboot and revival culture. There's even a fairly storied academic tradition casting nostalgia films and revivals as a hallmark of postmodernity, and of our contemporary culture more broadly. In the introduction to the book film Reboots, Daniel Herbert and Constantine Verevis write that reboots appear as a defining element of media within the current historical moment. So television as a medium has always tended towards the middle, to drawing out the narrative for as long as possible, but nowadays, even when things end, they don't end. Shows, and increasingly even films, finish on ambiguous notes, cliffhangers often, which mean they can be picked up again and again, and if a story does conclude, then it just gets rebooted instead of revived. To answer your question, the Bob Brom, that's why we can't let Futurama die, because more and more, pop culture is rejecting the very notion of an end. And by and large, we love this. Serialized franchises dominate pop culture, and Twitter is perpetually demanding that studios go back and continue projects which may not have gotten a fair shake. Release the Snyder Cut, restore the Snyderverse, and yes, save the Ghostverse. To be clear, I'm not saying that any of this is bad. I'm just saying that this mindset of the perpetual middle, where nothing's ever over and everything can be brought back, is enjoyed by studio bigwigs and consumers alike. This is a dominant way of thinking, but there are signs of cultural pushback against this trend of endless narratives. I know certain people who stopped watching the MCU after Avengers Endgame, for instance, choosing the closest thing Marvel has come to a conclusion to tap out of a series which seems to be continuing for the foreseeable future. More and more, we see TV shows writing proper endings, rather than pulling one together last minute as they learn they haven't been renewed. And I want to suggest that Futurama was an early example of a TV show which resisted, in some ways, the culture of the perpetual middle. Because even if the rest of the business was starting to pretend that endings didn't exist, Futurama was doing the opposite. Maybe it's because, from its early days, Fox seemed antagonistic towards the show, and the threat of cancellation hung over its head, as it was moved from time slot to time slot, but Futurama was determined to end properly, and so it committed to real finales, each time it was cancelled. There's 4 in total, and all of them would have worked as the final goodbye to this world. And while the Futurama team might have wanted to return for more episodes each of those times, the existence and quality of these 4 finale episodes tells us that the Futurama writers' room knew the value of an ending, particularly Season 7 Episode 16, Meanwhile, a truly touching goodbye. And in an age where original properties like Futurama are an endangered species, where sequels, adaptations, reboots and revivals dominate the cultural landscape, knowing the value of an ending, working against the trend of the perpetual middle, as Futurama did, feels like yet another way in which that show was ahead of its time. But now, one more revival on, one more finale later, this forward-thinking quality seems effaced, and startlingly, a revival feels more like a regression. That's why I can have viewers who agitate for the return of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, for instance, a show cancelled due to studio politics before it had the chance to wrap up its story, while also feeling aggrieved that a show as committed to finality as Futurama is being dredged up again. That's why this revival is weird, and the reactions to it are mixed. I hope these new episodes are good. Futurama's got a great track record of bouncing back, but if it doesn't this time, if it's unable to recapture its past glory, then that'll be a real shame. But there'd be an irony there too, that a show which always seemed to be living in the future finally got bogged down in the never-ending middle of the present. Also, if Futurama's return messes up Disenchantment's future, my disappointment will be immeasurable and my day ruined. So there's your warning, Matt. But what do you guys think? Are there any nuances I'm missing? And are you getting sick of the way culture just continues endlessly? Let me know below. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm planning to make more on Futurama down the line, plans which predate this revival, by the way. But thanks for watching this one, and a special thanks to all my patrons on screen now, especially Ian Fifield.